Okay, let me start with the introduction, Luca.
Mhm.
So, welcome everybody to this seminar. It's my pleasure to introduce Luca Garello, who's a second year PhD student at MaLGa and collaborates with the Robotics Brain and Cognitive Science Laboratory at the Italian Institute of Technology. His research interests are currently around machine learning and computer vision applied to robotics, with a focus on new algorithms that enhance the quality of human-robot interaction. So, Luca, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Vito, for the introduction. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can start. Thank you all. It's an honor to be here. Today I'm going to talk about imitation learning, and in particular, imitation learning applied to robotics. I'm a second year PhD student. I work with Nicoletta Noceti here in MaLGa, but I also collaborate with Francesco Rea and Alessandra Asciutti in IIT. Before starting, I really wanted to start with a social slide, because especially in this moment, for me, it's important to work in a group, and I'm really lucky. I work in two big groups. I think that you can guess which is the photo that was taken during the pandemic. But anyway, this slide is to say thank you all, because this work is would not have been possible without you. So thank you. Talking about my research, I decided to work on imitation learning. But why? Well, because imitation learning plays a key role during our development, and humans have this ability of being able to imitate an action just after the first time they see an action. So this ability is something that is not trivial, and it is important for our continuous learning during our life. In particular, it is important during this process, the mapping between the external agent that we are seeing and our inner body. We can say that imitation learning is a very natural process that has also been found in many other animal species. In particular, there are many researches on primates, and for this reason, we can say that imitation learning is something that is not only for humans, but is also used by many other species. For this reason, I think that it is fair to think that in the future, in an ideal future, we should be able to teach robots without being computer scientists. I work in the field of human-computer interaction, human-robot interaction, and I understand that nowadays we need huge data sets in order to be able to teach something to a robot, but a natural interaction should be based on a more natural way of learning. And for this reason, I really think that we should work in this direction. Before starting, I want to define what I'm referring to with the term imitation learning. With imitation learning, I'm referring to the ability to learn a new task just by looking at a more expert agent that is performing that task. In the literature, there are different definitions of what a true imitation is. I found this definition that for me it's a very nice one, and I want to show you this in particular. Tomasello in 1993 said that a true imitation is true only if the imitated behavior is new for the imitator, if the if both the imitator and the demonstrator are using the same strategy. And the third point is probably the most trivial one. Uh, Both the imitator and the demonstrator must accomplish the goal. But at this point, I wanted to add another point that is specific to my approach to imitation learning. And the point is that the imitator shouldn't have access to the internal states of the demonstrator. And this is particularly important when we talk about imitation learning in robotics, because many researchers are assuming that the robot can, the imitating robot can have access to the the real pose of the demonstrator, or can access to the forces that are uh, used by the demonstrator. So in a natural example, if I say try to move this pencil, you don't have access to the velocity of my hand. You don't have access to the joint angles of my limbs, and you just have access to a video. In this case, you can see a third person representation of the action, but you don't have numbers in order to replicate my action. So in my work, I'm assuming that the imitator is just seeing a 2D video as demonstration. The majority of the researchers agree on the fact that the imitation process is something very complex, but they agree on the fact that it can be described as the composition of two different separated tasks. The first process can be called a perceptual process. In this first part, we look at the action, and we reason on the spatial information, and we also recognize the objects in the scene. And this is what we call perception. Once we know what we have to do, we still have to move our body. And so we start with the second process, that is the motor control. In this second part, once we know what we are going to do, we have to understand how we are going to move our muscles. And I followed this approach. I tried to build an architecture that is somehow modular, also because it's not easy to train an end-to-end model to address the problem of imitation. I tried to split these the problem of imitation into two subparts, submodules. Okay, at this moment, we can start talking about my approach. As you can see from the slide, I'm working on generative models, and this is the proposed approach. We have a generative model that, starting from a third-person perspective of the action, is able to generate the equivalent first-person view of the same action. Not only, this network is also able to generate an embedded representation. This embedded representation is associated to each frame of the action. So at the end of the process, we we have a sequence of frames that are the description of the action from the first person perspective, what we can also call ego vision, and um, a sequence of embeddings that describe the action. For my work, I decided to use as a generator network a unit. Units born for image segmentation tasks, but then they were used for generative adversarial networks, and probably the most famous application is this one, the one you can see in the slides, starting from a semantic representation of a scene, of a building, whatever you want. These kind of networks are able to generate a plausible and realistic image. I'm not really interested in doing this, but I wanted to use these image-to-image translation models to translate the perspective of the actions. Here you can see the structure of the unit I'm using, and units are very similar to autoencoders. In the first part, that is colored in red, we have a compression of the information. Here we find convolutional layers and eventually max pooling layers. So in this part, in this first half of the network, we compress our input image, that is the third person representation of the action. We compress this information until we end with what we can call a bottleneck. And in this bottleneck, we have the information is described as an array. In this case, in our case, it is an array with dimension 1 by 512. Starting from this compressed representation, we are able to reconstruct the image, but the image expressed in the first person view. The main difference between an autoencoder and the unit are these gray arrows that connect the network. These connections are called skip connections, and they are just copy and paste functions that allows us to use higher the information from the previous layers in order to better reconstruct the image. In this phase, we are able to keep the information about the so-called higher level features, such as the textures of the objects. And these skip connections are really important for a good generation of the first person view. Okay, for my experiment, I recorded a set of actions in simulation. I decided to mainly work in simulation because in simulation we are able to collect virtually infinite dataset. Of course, in simulation, we are not going to break the real robot. This is important if you don't have thousands of robots. And another interesting thing is that in case of a pandemic, you can work from home. This is another important point. So I recorded 180 actions, reaching actions, in which the robot has to reach one of these three colored balls. Of course, we generate actions with all the permutations, and the position of the balls is randomly assigned in the workspace of the robot. Okay, we have seen our architecture. We may want to see how it performs when we want to generate the so-called first-person representation. Um, these are the results. As you can see from these small videos, the network is able to generate the first-person view in a consistent way. In the top left, you see the input image. I built different, slightly different models. In particularly, I wanted to explore how the size of the convolutional kernels can influence the result of the generation. And we found that larger kernels in general allow a better understanding of the action. It should improve the spatial awareness of the algorithm. Not only, we also explore the possibility of training our models on a blurred dataset, and this following the assumption that when we want to imitate an action, we are not interested in the small details of the action, but we are more interested in general understanding. So if we have a blurred video, we still have the information that we need. As you can see from this slide, I can run it again. The best performances are achieved by the networks with the larger convolutional kernels and with the blur dataset. It is important to evaluate generative models qualitatively, because we at the end of the day, we are interested in understanding what is the content of the action. But of course, it is also important to have numbers. So these are this is the L1 loss for all the networks, and the impressions that we had from the previous slide is confirmed. The larger the networks with larger kernel size perform slightly better. In particular, the one with the model with larger kernels that was trained on a blurred dataset. At this point, you may want to see what happens when we test our model on a real robot, because we trained our model on synthetic actions, but we don't know how it can perform on videos of the real robot. And interestingly, we are still able to understand and to reconstruct the first person view. In the top left, you can see again the input image. This time, the generated images are a bit more noisy, but it's okay. We are still able to understand what is the action. And yes, again, in general, larger kernels can improve the generation of the first-person view. We are still trying to understand why the network with larger kernels and the blurred data set as training set is performing slightly worse than the others, but still, each network is still working, so we are happy. We have seen how we are able to generate the first-person representation, but now we still have to understand how the embeddings are generated and if these embeddings can be useful for the imitation process. We performed different dimensionality reduction of the embeddings in order to be able to visualize them. And it is interestingly, we can see that different actions are mapped in a consistent way. So the reaching of different colored balls are mapped in different part of our plane. But not only, each action is embedded as a chain of points. So there is a sort of time consistent pattern. This is important when we want to use these embeddings to replicate the action if you want to associate each embedding to a pose of the robot, of the imitator. These are the embeddings generated from a synthetic or simulated demonstration, but the same is still true if we analyze a video of a real robot. We can still see a chain pattern, and the different reachings are still, let's say, separable. Okay, we have seen how we are able to generate the embeddings and how we can generate the first-person representation. At this point, we are interested in the second part of the imitation process. We want to control the robot in order to replicate the action we have seen. There are two possibilities, of course. We can use the embeddings in order to infer, for example, the pose of the end effector. The end effector is just the position. The pose of the end effector is the position of the end. There is a reference frame positioned in the palm of the end of the robot. And for doing this, we can use the embeddings, but we can also use the first-person image of the action. To do this, we may use different models. If we are going to use the embeddings, we can use traditional neural networks for regression. But if we are interested in the correlation between these samples in the time, we can use, for example, LSTM networks or GRU networks. While if we want to use the images, we have to use convolutional networks. And again, if we are interested in the time, we can use recurrent convolutional networks. I implemented two different models, one for the images and one for the embeddings. They were two, let's say, toy models. The model for the regression of the embeddings were a one layer neural network with 10 neurons, so really simple. While for the regression of the end effector, of the position of the end effector starting from the images, I implemented a convolutional network with 4 convolutional layers. So again, a very simple model. This just to see if it is possible to use this kind of data. In the future, I'm going to use more deep models. And as you can see, the mean absolute error of when we want to infer the position of the end effector, so the position of the end of the robot is the mean error is about 1 centimeter. I think that this is fine if we want to have a general if we want to have a general understanding of the action. And we are going to see how these models and these positions of the end effector can be used to control the robot. So we can see now an example of a simulated demonstration and the equivalent imitation performed with our model. As you can see, the imitation is really similar to the demonstration. And this is the domain we were working with. So we train our model in simulation, and we are able to imitate an action that is performed in simulation. Okay. We have also seen what happens when we have an image or a video of the real robot. We can see now that the performances are still good. The robot is still able to understand which is the position and the trajectory of the movement, but there is somehow a sort of overshooting. It's not super precise, the last part of the action, but I think that this is something that can be improved. Okay. To conclude, future directions of my work could be the implementation of a more interpretable or transparent model, because I'm interested in understanding which are the parts of the image that are more important for this perspective translation. And for sure, another interesting direction is the imitation of humans. I recorded some human demonstrations. I played a bit with some colleagues. I can say that there is this possibility, but let's say the output of the network are not good enough to imitate the action perfectly. So just by using just with a synthetic data set is not possible to replicate the action of a human. We will see if by mixing these two domains, so the real domain of humans and a simulated domain, it will be possible to replicate human actions. And I would say that for now, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Luca, very much. Very interesting talk. So is there any question from the audience?
Yes, I have two of them. So Luca, let's can you go back just on the blur data set with the two kernels? Yes, this one, yeah. Yeah, perfect. I was wondering, maybe one first question about this is, I don't know, in my mind, I would have some intuition about the fact that having a larger kernel, maybe it's better to have, I don't know, better comprehension of what's on the surroundings, and that's it. But I was wondering why, if you get it, or if you can give me an intuition, or if you had some thought about the fact that why is the blur dataset performing better? Because this is somehow counterintuitive to me. And the second question, it's about the fact that from what I've seen, the results are good on this scenario, but I was wondering if you have already tried on maybe on a different context, because basically when you move from the simulation to the real world, I would say you have a very limited scenario, I would say, with the same, for example, same colors. I've noticed that, for example, the color of the table is kind of similar to the color of the simulated one. And I was just wondering if you tried something in some different task, for example, maybe not just only with the colored balls, or in a different scene. These are the two questions. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Trying to answer the second question, the most common technique for this kind of problem is the so-called domain randomization. So you record a data set with objects with different colors, robot with all the possible colors, balls with again, different colors. This is something that for sure I'm going to do. And this should improve the generalization of my model when my model will be used on a more real or realistic scenario. But I still have to expand my data set in this sense. Is something that is somehow trivial to do, but it must be done. We still have to do it. Trying to answer to, the first question, I think that the use of a blurred dataset is it allows a better I don't know how to say it. Using a blurred dataset, we have a smoother loss function, because by blurring the images, we are eliminating all the small all the pixels that somehow can vary during the reconstruction phase. So I would say it's easier to reconstruct an image that is blurred. The loss function should be and is a bit smoother. This is my intuition.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for answering. Thank you.
So we have a question from Giulio Sandini, I would say. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry if you hear some background noise. Someone is drilling a hole in the next apartment. So sorry about that. Thanks for the talk. This was very interesting. Just a comment about blurring. Blurring is a regularization mechanism which is known in vision to be helpful for low-level processing. And the other remark is that young children do not really have a sharp image, at least for the first months. And this is supposed to give them the ability of reducing the amount of error that they have to correct somehow. So there are physiological reasons why blurring images during learning to reach is more effective. So this was a comment. The question is how. How strict has to be the position of the imitator and the person imitated? I mean, if the relative position changes during the reaching, or if position of the balls changes during the training part, how is this going to affect the change of perspective?
First of all, thank you for the suggestion. I will read the papers. Answering your question, that is a really good question. And now we are assuming that both the imitator and the demonstrator are in exactly the same environment. So the imitator is acting in the same environment of the demonstrator. So if I move the balls, the the imitation process is broken. This is a sort of open loop imitation, in the sense that when the robot has to imitate, it does not have a feedback from the environment. It doesn't know if the balls are changed or not. This is a limitation, but I understand that we have to work with a sort of generalization of the task. In this case, we try to evolve step by step, and the first process is the first goal was to replicate the exact same action. Try to replicate the same action in a different environment is something that is much more difficult, and we are going to work on that.
Okay, just another short question. I mean, this do you have any ideas of what could be, the physiological equivalents of the embeddings that you have been describing? I mean, are they represented somewhere in the brain? I mean, just plainly speaking, are they represented somewhere in the brain, or it could be interesting also to try to find if there is a physiological, anatomical explanation of these embeddings, because they sounds like very interesting intermediate representation.
We should have some primitives that can be associated to the movements we see, but I still have to learn a lot about this.
Okay, thanks, Luca.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a question from Anna Tavesca. Please go ahead.
Hi, Luca. Thank you very much for the talk. I have a bit of so it's less of a technical, more of a, let's say, big picture question, or just to ask you about your opinion on this. So you mentioned at the beginning of your talk that what we would like ideally is for the teachers of robots to not have to be computer scientists or roboticists, but people that can teach robots in a more natural way. And with this, I guess you're aware that we have it's not so much as a debate, more of a squabble between cognitive scientists and roboticists on the two different types of teaching. So like teaching by imitation versus teaching by instruction. So I was curious for you to tell me what is some advantage or some value that you see in teaching by imitation, by physically actually having a teacher that would imitate the movements for the robot, versus a method of teaching by instruction that would have to rely on a language, so like precision semantics.
Okay. The slide was probably this one. I would say that imitation learning is probably the most used technique. But if you want to make a comparison between teaching with instructions, I don't know. It's not super sharp, the difference in my mind.
Yeah, not the difference, but more about like what some advantage you see that imitation learning has over something that's so constrained like precision semantics.
Okay, but because probably we always learn by imitation. If I want to teach you how to place objects in on a table, I can show you, and you should be able to replicate the position of those objects. So it's something that happens many times in our life.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Are there any other questions?
I would have a question and a comment, if I can.
Sure. Go ahead.
So the comment is about the question that the professors asked about the physiological part. I suppose, I'm not sure about that, just a guess, that there is, in our brain, there are mirror neurons. And what happens when you see someone performing a task, these neurons are active. And so I think that this kind of embedding, I think that there are also studies about how imitation learning and mirror neurons are related to each other. But I think that this is what happens in neurophysiology. And instead about the question, I wanted to ask you a thing about the data set. So I suppose that in the data set is in this synthetic one, the trajectory of the arm to reach the ball is the same if the position of the ball doesn't change. But in humans, I think that the trajectory of the arm depends on the person. So the question is how this would affect the performance of the neural network. If you have for one position different trajectories of the arm.
Yes. Thank you for the question. The fact that we are recording actions with a robot is somehow limiting the variability of our actions, because given a point, the robot is going to reach that point, following more or less with a sort of variability the same trajectory. While with humans, probably we should see different trajectories. We should see more variable trajectories. We should test what happened when we reach that ball with different trajectories from the one we learned. I think that it should work anyway, but it is a limitation, the fact that we are learning from, let's say, predefined movements. In the case of a human data set, by using a human data set, this thing should be, we should improve our model for sure.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the talk.
Thank you.
I mean,
Okay.
just a short comment on the mirror neurons. Yes, this is of course it's a model which fits very well with the mirror neurons idea. On the other hand, the mirror neurons have this sort of this ability to be independent of the relative position between the observer and the actor. The question that I made was actually related to this ability to generalize, which is certainly based on some primitives somewhere, that may be related to these embeddings that Luca was mentioning, and in this case would be very interesting because it could give an idea of what is the mechanisms that stimulate mirror neurons, irrespective of the relative position between the observer and the actor. So I think it is interesting. It is an interesting concept.
Yeah, as far as I understood from the literature, mirror neurons should be activated for specific primitives. So it's something more general. As you said, mirror neurons are somehow view independent. So the same neuron, mirror neuron, can be activated with different trajectories that have the same meaning. For example, the grasping of an object is independent from which object. And this is something that we could explore.
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah.
And maybe also another comment could be that actually you, Luca, are using third view, if I correctly understood, third view videos in order to then reconstruct the first view image, right? So here, I mean, the mirror neurons hypothesis is very interesting, of course, but what I see from a machine learning point of view, it's basically that, and this probably also is related to the previous comment that we also had, that these embeddings basically are an idea of what the neural network is interpreting as the action in a certain way. So unfortunately for the generalization, we always have to remember that here we are talking with deep learning and it's very, very data dependent, right? So the robustness is always to be proved because really in deep learning, you can really just change the illumination or I don't know, the color of the balls and maybe it won't work anyway. And I'm not saying it will not work, but I mean, there is a possibility, right? So everything has to be tested. But I just wanted to also comment on this, saying that autoencoder and like similar architecture to the one that Luca was proposing are always very, very used, not just for the task, because in the end of the day, unless the task is very important, like going from third view to the first view, what is very interesting of this architecture is the embedding, because this embedding can be used for further things, for further computations, and has a lot of information, because in the end of the day, it is saying you what the neural network is interpreting as the action, right? So that's a very interesting part. And maybe this is also the reason that of why choosing imitation learning. Maybe, I mean, just to give an insight, maybe this could be a possibility, because if you just use a regular supervised learning or other form of learning, you won't go through this architecture and you won't leave the architecture giving you an embedding, a mapping of the data, which is meaningful to part of the action. So I would say that maybe if we want to go physiologically, this is also like what the, I mean, it's a very, very abstraction, but it could be like what the brain is, what is this set of operation which is the brain performing in order when you see an object to reach it. So I don't know, like whatever is inside from the motor cortex to the previous decision of making a movement, for instance. So it's very powerful, very interesting, but still generalization is not so simple to achieve in this kind of architecture, according to my opinion.
Yes, no, I personally agree with that. You know, I think it's a very important observation. Yeah. The other question is in the first slide there was this summary of what imitation is, and and this sentence, the imitated behavior is new for the imitator. No, one of the requirements. It's sort of ambiguous, because I mean, what do you mean by new is not very clear, and in fact one of the I think distinctive aspects of imitation in human is the fact that it's sort of incremental. So you can use what you have learned to learn something new. So it's not totally new, but is so in that sense, I think it is also another aspect we should be considered. Maybe in the future, this incremental role of imitation and the incremental evolution, which is also I think interesting.
It's a bit blurred, the first point. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I just want to ask a last question, and then if there is no other question, maybe we can close here. So my question, Luca, is can the blurring of the data improve the prediction, because the action you're trying to predict is actually, let's say, not very fine-grained action, because it's just like a grasping something, but you are not really looking at the exact point where you are going. So it's a very high-level action in a sense. Could this be the case?
You are asking if by blurring the image we are improving the prediction of.
Yeah, if you're improving the prediction, because basically what you're looking is just if you can reach the ball, but you are not exactly looking at the point of the reaching, right? It's a let's say it's not fine grained to me, because even if I reach within a certain uncertainty the ball, I can still take it, because the action is not so fine, let's say. Maybe this is the reason, right? Because from a machine learning point of view, that the blurring, as you were saying, is improving the results for the loss function you are using. That makes perfectly sense. But maybe this could be the case according to you.
It could be. I think that I have to run a lot of experiment on this, because all the stuff that you have seen is something new that I did in the last 2-3 weeks, but I don't have a paper on this, so I'm gathering ideas from you. This is something that I could do for sure.
Yeah, with young kids, again, with young kids is the same. I mean, they are not very good. I mean, they have sort of blurred vision, but they also have a motor control which is not so precise. So the two, somehow, the error that you make in motor control and the error that you can measure with vision matches somehow. You know, they are in the same ballpark. If you had a very good vision, it would be useless because your motor control at that age is not so good. So I think it's sort of, you know, guiding the process of learning much better than starting with sharp eyes and, you know, and lousy motor control.
Yep. Yeah, this makes perfectly sense. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question. Please go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Luca, for this presentation. I have one comment for the point that Anna raised, which is the difference between imitation learning and learning by more synthetic descriptions. I would say that in humans, I think we have both skills, but I think also for young ages, people tend to learn more with imitation. So, and when humans get older, they more go to try to understand the movement with more synthetic descriptions and then perform the movement. Probably because younger children doesn't have the same experience on the embodiment or something like that. Yeah, so I just wanted to add this comment. Another point also I discussed with Luca before, but also could be interested to mention it, which is also like a question somehow. Basically, the image that Luca presented for the human and monkey. So also the animals has the ability of imitations, and sometimes they doesn't have the same embodiment as humans. So could you do you think that the embeddings could be used for some sort of teaching the robot that has different embodiment, like from the human, to perform similar movements with different body shape? That's it.
Thank you, Omar, for the question. I think what you said is right. The embeddings could be a good way to address the problem of different embodiment. From the visual point of view, the main problems in imitation learning are the view translation between third person and first person, but of course also the embodiment mismatch. So this is true also for humans. When I want to replicate the action of a human. If I'm trying to replicate the action of a baby, of course, maybe not a baby, let's say a child, we don't have the same body. I have to rescale the movement I'm seeing to my body, and this is another problem, of course. I started with this research with the assumption that the imitator and the demonstrator have the same body, and this makes the process much easier. But probably the embeddings could be a way of addressing this additional problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Omar.
Okay, so I don't see any question on YouTube. So let's thank our speaker again. Thank you, Luca.
Good.
Thank you.
And we can close here. Thank you very much for attending.